Hey Fireflies! This video is going to be all about my tips and tricks for customizing, how I customize, and what supplies I use for customizing Littlest pet shops. Let's get started. So the first step to customizing is having a LPS base in mind before you start anything else. So I get my bases from various places and I put them all in a bag so it's easy access whenever I want to customize something. Here is my bag of bases. I've noticed the most high quality fake LPS for customizing is from mini LPS shops, so I buy from there. I also will buy these bases secondhand because there are people that will resell them maybe on Instagram or someplace else, so you maybe can find them for a little bit cheaper because honestly they've kind of gotten a little bit pricey if you ask me. I also use G7s as bases because they are easy accessibility, especially the ones from like the blind bag collections or the blind box collections. For me anyway, they're pretty easy to get my hands on and pretty cheap considering. And another option for bases is either damaged LPS or really common LPS. These are what I like to use anyway because I don't want to paint anything that's in good condition or that's rare in any way. So if it's like super common, I will paint it, or if it is damaged like these here, I will set them in the customizing bag. And I find pretty good deals on damaged pets on Whatnot. If you don't have Whatnot, you can use my link in the description to set up an account and it gives you some credit if you do that, and then you might be able to find bases like this for basically free if you use Whatnot credits. The next step that I do is design my custom on an app on my phone called Sketchbook. So I just draw my designs with my finger. I've noticed that doing the ideas with my finger on my phone works out just fine for me. Here's a few customs I've designed in the past with the app, and you can see some inspo pictures I've put on here that I get from Pinterest. So another tip is to get inspo from Pinterest or just from other artists or patterns. As you can see, I have plenty of things saved here in my board for inspiration. I literally have a board for custom inspo and I just save anything cute here that I think could be incorporated into an LPS custom idea. I'm not great at knowing what shades and what colors look great together, so I always look up color palettes on Pinterest as well, and that has helped me so much. It's made like the colors of my customs look cohesive and much more intentional than just me trying to come up with the colors myself and color combos. It just has helped me tremendously. The next thing we need to talk about is paint. I have this giant thing here just filled with paint for customizing. These are the two brands of paint that I use. I just picked them up from Walmart. So we have Deco Art Americana. These paints always do a really good job, and I always make sure they are acrylic paint. That's the best for LPS customizing, and I think they have some really pretty shades of paint. My OG that I've always painted with is Apple Barrel. They're really cheap. You can get them like in a big pack at Walmart. If you plan to customize a lot, my tip is to get a big thing of white and possibly black too, because they are just colors that you use really often, especially to mix your colors to make them lighter or darker. When it comes to sculpting, I'm no expert. It's always been a weakness of mine, but I do have some clay in case I want to sculpt here and there. So the clay I use is called Kneadatite. It's this blue and yellow clay. I started using this many years ago because of Pia's Little Customs. She was a big inspiration for me and my customs, and she always used Kneadatite and her customs and her sculpting always looked amazing, so I've just been using that for years. But I also have this Sculpey air dry clay, which sometimes is a little easier to use. The main downside of this clay is that it doesn't stick to your LPS as well, so sometimes I have to glue it in place. So because if my sculpting abilities aren't great, I like to get these molds that are perfect for putting the clay in and using them on custom. So I have these flowers and these bows. They always come in handy. And I got these from AliExpress. For today's custom, to kind of show a little bit of how I paint, I'm going to be using this base. It is a G7 Scottish Fold cat, and I think that I can make it look much cuter than it is right now if I paint it. This step isn't something I would typically do, and I don't think it's necessary in all cases. I know of a lot of customizers that remove the paint with acetone before they paint, but I never notice a difference when doing that, except for when painting a G7, because the eyes and the lashes are kind of like 3D. There's no way to show it on camera, but you can feel the lashes. They use like a different paint on the eyes. Because of that reason, I'm gonna try my best to take it off with acetone, but I also know that it's very hard to get off. I've done it before, but it definitely takes patience and lots of scrubbing. It's starting to come off now. If you're painting a normal G2 LPS, I personally don't think this step is necessary, but if you're painting a G7, it might be best to take off at least the parts that stick out, because you don't want it to come through the paint of the custom. The next step is painting, of course. So I always paint on a paper plate, and I get a palette and a little thing of water. I put it in the middle of my palette like that. Then I have to color match for the base. Now, color matching is something that I used to be not great at, but I've definitely gotten more familiar with it. I've put more attention into making sure I get the right shades of color, because I think it really makes all the difference for your custom to look how you want it to look. For a majority of the base color for this custom is a creamish, tannish, brownish, so I'm gonna use these two colors and try to get the shade that I need. So I've mixed together a color here. I've noticed that it's just not quite the shade that I need, so I'm gonna add just a tiny bit of orange and see how that changes it. I just kind of keep playing with the color like this until I get what I need. Once I have the color that I need, I then thin the paint like this. You don't have to have a dropper, just anything to put water in the paint. So I'm gonna start with this amount, mix it together, and see if that thins it the way that I want it to be thin. As you can see, it's starting to bubble. You can also see I made plenty of this color. You want to make sure you have plenty of every color that is very prominent in your custom, specifically with base color. So that was a great amount of water. It's very thin. You can see that it's starting to drip off of my paintbrush, which maybe is slightly too thin. It's not too thin to the point that it's not going to stick to the custom. Just be careful about that to not add too much water. This is the size brush that I like to use for a base coat, but I know of some people that like to use a bigger brush like this. It just depends on what works good for you, but I like to use a smaller brush so I can get into the creases of the legs and the fur really well with a small brush. So then I just go on in and paint. I paint over the entire thing, any places that's gonna have this color on it. You just want to make sure that you're smoothing out your paint as you go. You don't want to paint when the paint is in the middle of drying. You only want to paint like while it's wet, if that makes sense. I don't have any particular direction that I go. I'm painting this way now, but then sometimes I'll do that. I don't notice that it makes a big difference. I also don't have the smoothest customs in the world, so maybe going all kinds of different directions isn't the best. I don't know. This is just how I do it. Usually when I'm doing the base color, I like to start with the head and I let that completely dry before I move on to the body. This is just a tip, not a necessity, but when I'm painting the base coat especially, I like to have a handheld fan, turn that on the custom so the paint dries faster. That's another tip, is just make sure you're ready to commit to this. because it's not gonna happen in just an hour. It's gonna take multiple hours depending on complexity of the custom, so just be prepared for the time that it's gonna take to do this. Now that the head is dry, I move on to the body. Sometimes the bodies have a different plastic than the head, so it makes them slicker and the paint doesn't stick to it as well, so you just kind of have to be patient with it and also careful because the paint can chip easier on the body, so just when it dries, just try to be careful to not touch it too much as you don't really know what's going to set it off. This is what my custom looks like after one layer, so I just keep repeating this process until it is completely covered to the desired look. The next thing I do is just map out with a pencil what I want to paint next, so it looks like this. Now I'm just filling in those lines with the colors I want. This is what it looks like after one layer of painting, so I definitely have to go back in with more layers. One layer done with the brown and the blue, so I'm gonna go back in with those colors until it looks the way I want it to. I have all of my main colors finished, so I got them to the opacity that I want them to be. The next step that I usually take after this is to start going in with the finer details if there are any, and for this custom I have plenty of small details to get started on. This is when it matters to go in with a really tiny brush. I usually use these two. You can see how tiny they are. This is the brand that I use. I just got these from Amazon. I use them on every single custom, so I can't recommend enough to get really tiny brushes when customizing. Anything like nail art, paintbrush should always be pretty small. I highly recommend it. Works best for customizing little tiny details. As I'm painting, I have realized I am starting on a layer that shouldn't have been done first. I have another color to go in with first before I do the stars, and that is because some of the stars overlap with the color that I'm about to go in with. So my idea is to trace out all of these curves and lines with a metallic, and I hope that it's going to look good and going to be worth it because it's probably going to be a little time consuming. This is something to always try to pay attention to, is what is the best way to layer my colors. So I noticed on my drawing that the white stars go over top of the metallic stripes sometimes, so I should lay down the metallic stripes before I lay on the white stars. So that's where I decided to go back and fix my mistake. My next tip is if you're going to go in with a light color or something that doesn't stick to the plastic that well, start with white. So the metallic silver that I'm going to use doesn't stick that well and doesn't show up that well on its own. So I'm going to start by painting white lines where I need the metallic to go. And yes, this is annoying and it's time consuming, but at the end of the day, this is going to be easier and look better than it would look if I just painted the metallic on. When doing small details like this, I bring the custom as close to my face as I need it to be, and for something like lines or stripes like this, I tend to use the side of the brush rather than the point to keep it a consistent size. and it just seems to glide much easier like that. This is what one layer of the metallic looks like. You can still see some of the white through it, so I'm gonna go in and go over that again until it gets the shade that I want it to be. I don't want it to be able to see much of the white peeking through, so even when I put the white down first, I still have to do another layer of paint to get it to look the way I want, because this is one of those paint colors that is difficult to work with. After finishing both layers of the metallic, now it is time to go in and clean up. So you may have some mistakes when you paint, like I did. I smudged the metallic all over, so I'm gonna go through and clean all of that up now. I cleaned up all of my mistakes and I painted on lots more stars, as you can see here, all kinds of little white stars, and then I painted these two big stars on the face, and I also painted one on the back. When I first painted these, I wasn't sure how I felt about them, but I decided to trust the process. So that is another tip. If something isn't looking right, sometimes you just have to trust the process and it'll turn out in the end. The next step is the eyes, which I know a lot of people struggle with, so I'm just gonna tell you how I do it. So I start with the white and just cover the eye pretty much completely with the white. Anywhere that white is gonna show through, I cover that up. This is what it looks like after one layer of white, so I'm gonna go through with another layer. This is with the second layer, and I think it looks good to go in with some color now. The next thing I paint is the darkest color of the eye. This is what it looks like after one layer, and I'm gonna go through with another layer to darken it up. Well, I dropped my custom and I smudged the red below the eye, and I almost panicked, but if this happens, there's no reason to panic. A quick fix is to grab a disinfectant wipe or a wet paper towel and just kind of gently dab the part that just got messed up, and usually it'll take off just the most recent layer of paint and not the paint underneath. As long as you make sure you don't press too hard, it'll come right off. As you can see, it's starting to come off. Sometimes it doesn't come off completely, then you just have to go in with colors and fix it up. An unfortunate mistake, but nothing that's gonna ruin anything. Now that I have my dark color painted, I'm gonna go in with a lighter color next. This tip is kind of random, but it just came to me as I'm painting that sometimes when I'm painting with a color for a long time, the paint has been on the brush for a while, and you want to make sure that that paint doesn't start to dry up on your brush. So just make sure that while you're painting, you rinse your brush just to clear your brush of the paint so it doesn't start to dry on it. Then I go in with black or my darkest color depending on what I'm doing on the custom. With this custom, I'm using black. I'm not going to be able to film the next couple parts of the eyes because I'm going to have to bring it up really close to my face, but the next thing I do is highlights and lashes if you're doing lashes. Now that I have finally finished painting the entire custom, she is ready to be sealed so the paint will be protected and won't chip easily. This is the brand that I use to seal my customs, and I also have a gloss version. So I have Ultra Matte, which isn't going to have any type of shine to it, and then I have the gloss, which I use for the eyes and any other part of the custom that I want to be shiny. When I gloss, I just use that same paintbrush that I like to use for the base coat. I don't add any water to my gloss, and I start with either just the head or just the body, just like I'm doing a base coat. I've run into a slight issue which I was worried about. When I put the Ultra Matte over the metallic, it doesn't have a shine anymore. So that makes me really sad. I don't know if I'll try to redo it on the back or not, but maybe I'll just try to avoid sealing the metallic on the front and the body. When I seal the body, I make sure to avoid the neck and do it last, just to make sure that none of the paint rubs, because that's where it is most likely to rub. I don't really have any tips for the gloss, except sometimes you may need more than one coat depending on how shiny you want the eyes to be. As you can see, this custom is completely finished. I may go through and touch up the metallic to get it a little shinier. I tried to not seal it on the body and on the face as much, but I still touched it a little bit, so it's definitely not as shiny as it was before, which makes me really sad because now it just looks like plain old boring gray. This custom actually took me a really long time to finish, a lot longer than I expected, which is pretty typical for me. I need to just start anticipating that it's gonna take me a long time. I worked on it on and off for probably like 2 weeks. You might be wondering, like, how did you continue to paint with the same colors for 2 weeks? Because that was something that I always wondered how people did. Actually, for the longest time, I just would remake the paint colors that I needed every single time that I painted because I didn't know that there was a trick that you could do to keep your paint fresh. So all you have to do to keep your paint fresh is get a container with a lid, a paper towel, wet it, put it in the bottom, and then put your palette in the container and then put the lid on, and it keeps your paint from drying. And I think that just about does it. That's my final tip for LPS customizing. Whether you're a beginner or somebody who just wants to get better at customizing, I hope this video was helpful and now you can start or continue your customizing journey, and I hope that you've learned something from this video. Thank you so much for tuning in and learning all of my customizing secrets. I will see you guys next video.